All right, students, welcome back. We're here for another SAT comprehensive review. I hope you guys are all just all hanging in there, right? It's just been such a crazy time. I know that some of you guys are more than some, right? Probably all of you guys have had your test canceled. They didn't have the June test. They didn't have did they have June? Some places didn't have March, right? Everybody I don't think had anywhere in May. So it's been just such a crazy time. And guys, again, it's just so important that as you go through this process, and especially if you're taking this Saturday's official test, that you just stay calm and you realize that you have to control what you can control, and that's kind of that's been our notion. That's the thing that we talk about the most in our own programs is what can we control? How can we have the right mindset, the most positive mindset going into Saturday, because that's really all that matters, right? You're gonna have to go. The circumstances are gonna be different for everybody, but one thing you guys can be assured, right? I'm sorry, the circumstances are different this year than they ever have been in the past. But one thing you guys can be sure of is that it's gonna be the same for everybody on Saturday. It's not gonna change. I can't imagine a situation where somebody doesn't have to wear a mask while they're taking the test on Saturday. And so these are all things that you have to make sure that you're aware of. And ultimately, the SAT is a test that's based against it, right? It's on everybody. It's a nationwide scale, or it's a worldwide scale for that matter. And so when you guys go into this test, if you can have the person that's the most positive, the one that wants to continue to push forward, to get one more question right, is going to be ultimately the one that does the best on this exam. Because the first thing that we're going to talk about, which was what we always talk about, and again, this is going to be after we answer some general questions here, but the first thing we're going to talk about is the scale and just how that mindset and knowing the scale can really help you guys. So a couple things before we get going. This is obviously, everybody has access to this. You guys can ask questions. If you don't have access to the live stream chat, it should be in the top right or bottom right-hand corner of your screen. We are very fortunate today, that wherever you guys are today, to have our teaching assistant, Sarah. One of our teaching assistants is going to be handling most of the chat today. And it's super, super great to have her. And again, please feel free to ask her any questions. I'm sure she'll be responding in the chat. Sarah is somebody within the last 2 or 3 years as a student who has scored in the top, I think she got a perfect score on the ACT. She got a perfect score on the SAT Math 2, and I think she got maybe 20 points off on the regular SAT, so something like a 1580. I don't bring that up to put pressure on Sarah or to put pressure on you guys, but I bring it up because she can be a great resource, and I'll probably use her as an example during some of the things that we talk about during the overall review. But she's a fantastic resource of somebody who has been in this position relatively recently and can definitely help you guys and answer questions. So I'm thrilled that she could be on the chat tonight. So you'll see her, for those that are commenting and asking questions, you'll see her doing that. And again, like I said but at the very beginning, we'll spend about 15 to 20 minutes here going through any general questions you guys have. Then we'll do a comprehensive review on each section of the SAT. And when I say comprehensive, we don't have enough time to cover all the concepts, of course. But we will spend a little bit of time on each section and talking about what I want you guys to remember the most going into Saturday. And then if anybody has any questions, and again, feel free to ask questions during that time too. We'll try to keep those questions more specific to that section. And then at the end, we will answer any final questions you guys have. We always set aside about 2 hours for this, but it usually lasts about 90 minutes or so. So but again, we're happy to stay around and answer any questions you guys have. So just again, we'll spend a little bit of time doing some general questions. So it always takes me a little bit to read through these. Let's see, school, any tips for reading? Yeah, so guys, any general tips on the section? So Dev, I'll get into all the general section tips during the reading section. So definitely be able to help you there on the reading section. So we'll hold off on that one just for right now, but we'll come back to it. Oh, and then Sarah, yeah. So Sarah, again, great comment there. For Deb, let's see who the question is. Oh, great question. Heroic here. Great question about test optional. So one of the things that I wish schools and counselors and all this stuff, I really wish they'd do a better job of explaining, and I know a lot of you guys already know this, but we had a Heroic ask a question about test optional. Very, very, very smart question, because there's a major difference between doing test optional and test blind. What that means is test optional means that they're still considering the test. It's a part of the application. Do you have to submit one? No. Is it going to be considered if it is submitted? Yes. And so the best example that I have of test optional, the University of Chicago, which is one of the best schools in the country, as many of you guys know, especially for math and economics. The University of Chicago has actually been test optional for quite a while now. They don't actually require you to submit a test score. Yet I think it's 90% of their admitted applicants still do submit a test score. So again, in that sense, if you have an unbelievable application, like just unbelievable, you've worked extremely hard, and even more so, like let's say you have 3 5s on 3 AP exams, then in that case, it's probably better to maybe not submit a test score, but that would be with an exceptional score. There's no indication, in Harvard is another example, they're not test optional usually, but they are this year. They held out to the last possible minute after, I think it was just before the July ACT got canceled, is when Harvard kind of officially admitted that they were going test optional. So they were holding out, meaning that there's still some consideration of these test scores for seniors for sure. And so again, this is for seniors and juniors. If the juniors if everything starts going test optional for the junior class as well, I would just be really aware of what test optional means. It's a great question, and it's one that it doesn't mean that you have to submit a test score. It doesn't mean that you have to do all this stuff but I just want you guys to have as much information as you possibly can based on my experiences. I've worked with now over 1,000 students in the last 7 years or so on SAT and ACT stuff, if you can believe it. If I was 17 years old sitting in your situation 10, 11, 12 years ago, and I thought to myself, this is what I'd be doing for a living, I think you were crazy. But again, because of the amount of students I've seen and the amount of time I've spent looking at this stuff, my general experiences are the things that I try to communicate to you guys, and that's how I feel about test optional, that in rare circumstances, and especially this year because there's going to be so many students that apply to different universities, because basically everywhere is test optional, that a really good test score can definitely push you in the right direction, I think, in terms of applications. Yeah, guys, so good question. Not to toot our own horn here, but a couple things, guys. First and foremost, we have our own books. So we had a question about which books you recommend. Hero, can you just give me a thumbs up? And guys, anybody that's participating in that, if you guys just want to give me a thumbs up that everything's making sense, just so we know who's here and we can address you guys. But can you give me a thumbs up if that whole explanation on test optional made sense? This is our book. It's very comprehensive. All of our tutors and teachers write this book. We have an ACT one as well. It's very thick. If you guys have downloaded our Star U app, I mentioned it in a lot of our videos, and this is for Neil. I mentioned in a lot of our videos, our Star U app actually has all of this content from the book in digital form, and it's free to download, and most of the content from here is free on the app as well. It's very comprehensive. It's depending, there's no easy fix or solution. There's no easy fix or solution to getting a better score on this test. It's all about hard work and continuing to push yourself. And so that's kind of how we've written the books, and we edit the books based on the fact that we just want it to be very comprehensive. It's not for everybody, but it truly covers. Sometimes I look through it, I'm just like, where in the world did that come from? And then it does show up on one random test, like for the ACT especially. ACT math is so ridiculous sometimes, and like somehow we still have conics covered in the book on the ACT, and same thing with the SAT as well. So. Yeah, guys. Again, I think it's important that I just feel very strongly about our own books because they're one of the only ones, if not the only one, that's written and edited by real SAT and ACT tutors, not some third-party source. So that's kind of how I feel on that note. It's a good question. And of course, Khan Academy. So yeah, besides our book, if you guys are looking for something other than our book and me tooting our own horn here, Khan Academy is great as well. So they do a good job, and it's great that they've released a lot of this material for free. So that's another good one. I'm sure all of you guys have used that though already. Guys, if you have any questions about contacting us outside the video, you can look at it's not always going to be me responding, but our teaching assistants and our teachers respond. We have Reddit. We respond almost always beneath the videos. So if you guys comment on one of these videos, somebody is bound to respond to you. In terms of contacting you, info@startutors.net or admin@startutors.net, kind of depending on what you want. Info is probably if you have general questions. So email us, info@startutors.net, and we'll contact you guys for sure. We're pretty good about responding. We try to respond as often and as much as we can. And then Reddit, yeah. And then we respond on Reddit a lot too, so that'd be another one. Social science passages, yeah, we'll get to that. In terms of these first 15, 20 minutes are just kind of general questions. But when we get to the reading section, I'm happy to answer any questions related to the reading section. So hang on to that one, and if I forget to answer it, anything dealing with specific sections, if you guys have already asked it, just hang on to it for right now. And if I forget to bring it up again, just type it in again. Let's see what else we got here. Here's another question. What do you recommend? Yeah, August SAT, we'll talk about warming up. Okay, so yeah, talking about priming your brain for the August SAT this weekend. We'll talk about warming up. That's a huge component of this. I'm such a big believer in that, so we'll talk about that in a second. Let's see. Yeah, guys, so in terms of doing better, if you guys have found yourself heroic, if you've found yourself at a plateau, if you guys can't do it, or I should say, if you find yourself at a plateau ever when you're preparing, and this is especially true for seniors, I know that it stinks to have to do this, but try taking an untimed test. And the reason that untimed tests, and this is for anybody that hits that plateau, but the reason that those can be so helpful is because it really comes down into, is it a timing issue, or is it a comprehension issue? Because if there's no time, even if the test takes you 3 hours, theoretically you should be able to get every question right, even if it means going to get a book and looking stuff up. If you take an untimed test ever, it's always going to be pretty beneficial, because if you still miss, 35 questions when it's untimed, and there's 154 questions on the SAT, if you miss 35 questions, then it's not really a timing thing or a stress thing. It's more just you got to do more comprehension. Now, on the flip side, if you get 154 questions right, and and each section takes you 3 hours, then it's not a comprehension issue. It's just trying to apply the data and making those decisions a little bit faster. So it's a good question. We just did a live reading section, so if you guys didn't see that one, if anybody saw that live reading, we did test number 10. It should be in the video bank. You guys search our channel. You guys should see the SAT test 10. We did that live reading section. We'll try to do another one maybe tomorrow, but we have another video, like our hype video tomorrow, that we'll talk about the warm-up. I encourage you guys to check that out. While I'm thinking about that, let me just post that. If you guys are interested, we always do every Friday afternoon or Friday evening before, depending on where you are, we do a hype video, which is just designed to get you guys fired up for the test. I'm a big believer in momentum. I really think that if you're just moving through, if you don't have that moment of just like, I don't want to be here anymore, if you don't get that moment, it's amazing how well you can do on this test with that and that alone. So our hype video, if you guys want to watch it, is tomorrow. So again, I brought that up because we have that live reading section for SAT Test 10. If you didn't get a chance to look at that, we'll try to do one tomorrow, but it's probably, at earliest, we'll probably be able to do it before the September test. But here's the SAT hype live stream link for tomorrow. If you guys are interested. Yeah, guys, we actually made a study plan. That's another good question. Let me send the link for that. Here's the day-by-day study plan for anybody that's taking September. Oh, wait, no, actually, that's for the ACT. Let me think about that. Yeah, I think we can put together something for the SAT as well for the study plan, because we have a day-by-day ACT study plan right now. What day is the SAT in September? Like the 26th, I think, maybe? Is it the 26th? Does anybody... I think it's the 26th. Important formulas to know for the SAT. We haven't. We probably should. Generally, I mean, honestly, if you guys, I just have this test number 8 pulled up on my computer, on my screen here. Honestly, these are the most important formulas to know. The SAT is kind of notorious for not really making it formula-based, or they put the formula in the question. One thing that I'd say that I would be... that if I were you, I would be very aware of, because it's something that most students don't cover for the math section. And again, this is just if you're already scoring probably 700 plus. If you're already scoring 700 plus for the math section, linear regression. If you guys, Sarah, do you remember that? Do you remember linear regression being? Again, I only bring that up because Sarah is one of. Sarah's definitely better at math than I am now, even though she's 10, 11 years younger than I am. She's definitely better, or whatever, 10. She's definitely better than I am at math, and probably ever will be. And so I always try to ask her questions about whether or not she remembers this. Linear regression is something that comes up a lot. It's a stats topic, but you probably covered it a little bit maybe in and data. I don't even know where you cover it, but I know where you covered it in a statistics class. But if you haven't taken stats yet, I don't know why. But anyway, linear regression, that's something that's covered in our book. If you guys are interested again in looking at that, that's something that might be it's probably more important. Again, memorizing individual formulas for the SAT, because the SAT, unlike the ACT, where formulas are a big deal, the SAT is really trying to test you on the math section on whether or not you know concepts overall. And what I mean by that, and this is something that everybody should probably write down for sure if you're taking the test beyond August, right? If you're not taking just this Saturday's test, you're taking it beyond that. The SAT is looking for, everybody knows x squared minus 9 factors to x plus 3, right? X minus 3. Okay, that's something that we see all the time in school, so most students know that. What the SAT looks for is not whether or not you can just memorize and comprehend stuff that you'd see in school all the time. They want to see if you really know what this difference of two squares concept really means. And so what I mean by that is if you get something like x squared minus 9, right, x squared minus 9, if you see something like 4x squared minus minus 144, okay, that's not something that most students think about very often. But this x squared minus 9 as an example, and again, this is how you want to think about the math test on the SAT, because it is very different from a formula, right? It's very different from a formula, formulaic like it is on the ACT math section, right? This just factors into 2x minus 12 times 2x plus 12. And again, what the SAT is really looking for is, do you know that the difference of two squares, right, multiplying these two, do you really know that this is the perfect square and this is a perfect square and so is the x squared, so that formula still makes sense? Can everybody give me a thumbs up? Again, that's a very specific example for what I'm trying to get across in terms of how the SAT math test tends to be laid out. But what I want to communicate is that it's beyond any type of individual formula. It's really asking you things like linear regressions, and knowing that a line of best fit is just, all a line of best fit is that it's a line based on data points, because nothing in the world is perfectly usually on a line. It's around the line, and so that's what the line of best fit comes in. And line of best fit, all that kind of stuff tends to come up. Is that cool, guys? It's the biggest difference between, it's what makes the SAT the SAT math sections are either extremely easy or very difficult. It's very easy in the sense that if you get the concept, like if you get the overarching concept, then it's super easy. It's just basically it's almost all Algebra 2 concepts with a little bit of geometry, a little bit of basic algebra, and a little bit of pre-calculus, but it's so heavily weighted on Algebra 2. And if you don't know just like the general understanding of math at the Algebra 2 level, that's really what they're testing on. Whereas the ACT is much more about like asking you ridiculous concepts, and in some ways it's good, in some ways it's bad. It's a little bit more straightforward, but that's the best. Yeah, that's the best, probably the best example I can give in terms of the SAT math section. If you guys can hear my dog barking, that's I apologize in advance. Okay. All right, guys. So any other questions? Can everybody give me 2 thumbs up in the chat if you guys are ready to move on? We're going to talk about each individual section. We're going to also talk about the scale and how important it is, because just from a mental standpoint, how important it is to remember the scale. Whoever asked that, I forget whoever asked the question about, warm up. We'll actually cover that. I just remember we'll cover that tomorrow in that hype video to get you guys excited to go and ready. We'll also talk about what you need to bring to have ready to go the night before the exam, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so yeah, we'll cover all that kind of stuff tomorrow. So night before, warm up. We'll give you guys some warm up practice problems to do on the morning of the exam for those that are taking it on Saturday. But if everybody's ready to move on, we'll talk a little bit more about the general SAT reading section. So yeah, and we'll talk about the scale. So let's start with that, guys. So the first thing that I want to bring up, I want to talk to you guys a little bit. It's so important to recognize this, because by and large, the SAT is it's not just a concept review test. It's really also an endurance test more than anything, right? It's a psychological test. It's how hard it's how much focus can I have. And the best example that I use, if you take somebody that goes to MIT, and I've said this in the videos many times before, but I am not the MIT, I'm not the Harvard guy. If you're looking for you have to be so mentally focused to be going to those schools, and I applaud anybody that's like that. I just unfortunately have never had that type of true divine focus on one thing, and so that's they need that. So again, when I say that, it's like somebody that goes to MIT becomes a rocket scientist, and that rocket scientist might be responsible for putting the heat shield right on the space shuttle, right? If you work at SpaceX, somebody out there is deciding, maybe it's a computer that actually places the whatever, but somebody's deciding how that heat shield is going to work. And that's not the person, and that person probably goes to MIT at some point, right? And that's not the person you want to be like, oh, maybe that works, right? You have to be really focused to go to MIT, and that's why these tests still matter so much to colleges, because if you go to Harvard, or if you go to any of these great schools, or if you don't go to Harvard, if you go to, there's so many great schools out there now, which is so great. That's the best part about the higher education system now, is there's so many great schools that if you go and you sit in a 3-hour math final where you're being judged or graded against the rest of just the class, that's how a college final is graded. It's not based on your percentile. It's based just on, it's exactly like the SAT. Well, if you go to Harvard and you have to compete against the top 0.5% of the students in the country, the only thing Harvard doesn't like more than declining students is they don't like having to ask a student to leave because their grades aren't there, and that's why they need to make sure that you're capable of taking tests, because that's what you're ultimately going to have to do at a school like Harvard or anywhere. If you're in an engineering program, you have to take these really big math finals where you're graded against the students in the class, not against the test itself, and that's where they need to make sure that you have the experience and the stress, and you can handle that level of stress. Yeah, so, guys, so I'll do another reading section. So let me just talk to you guys, and again, this is more general, and then we'll jump into the reading section. It's something I think it's so important. So let's talk about the scale just briefly. If you guys want to follow along, I'm looking at SAT test number 8 scale. Sarah, is there any way, if you're still hanging out here, if you're still watching, Sarah, is there any way that you could post, just type in scoring SAT test 8 on Google? And Sarah, could you just post that link if anybody wants to follow along? So guys, what you'll see here, and again, this is very important. We'll only talk about this really briefly, but if you guys look at this scale, one of the things I want you to remember if you're taking the test on Saturday is how important it is to continue that momentum, right? If you guys are just continuing to say to yourself, okay, one more question, because the SAT is extremely easy to understand it's extremely easy to understand how the grading works. In fact, it's so easy to the sense that there are 1,600 points. I know all of you guys know this one. There are 1,600 points available on the SAT, 1,600 points, and there are 154 total questions. Okay, so that's almost 160 questions to help us with our our math. And so each question is worth about 10 points. And this is especially true at the higher levels of the exam. So one of the things that I keep saying to students all the time is, even if it's super annoying to hear my voice in the back of your head on test day being like, come on, one more question, let's get one more right, then I'm thrilled with that. Even if you find that to be super annoying, if you hear my voice in the back of your head telling you to get one more question done, you'll realize how easy it is to figure out how to improve your score by, let's say, 100 points. And I'm thoroughly convinced, after looking at this for as long as I have, that just the ability to keep focused and have that positive energy, be like, you know what, I want to do this right now. I can hang out with my friends after this. I can go be a high school student and do all the fun things that happen in high school. I can do that later. But for right now, if I get 10 more questions right, just 10 more questions, I'm going to get 100 more points on this test. It's amazing how often we see students get into that vibe of like, oh, I don't even care if my parents yell at me, or I don't even care if I'm grounded, or I don't even care what college I go to anymore. And they get that feeling in the middle of the test. And that's especially true because on the SAT, unfortunately for you guys, you have to start with the SAT reading section, which, as many of you guys have already said in the chat, is the hardest single section of the exam. And so if that's the case, that's already going to wear you out. So when you get to the break after the reading section, you got to take advantage of that. You got to try to re-energize. You got to get a snack, get some water, right? Take that part of it seriously, rather than going out into the hall with your friend and being like, oh my God, I failed that, I'm never going to go to school, right? That psychs you out to begin with, and who knows how you did. We don't want to get into that mentality. Who's ever done that before? Can anybody give me a thumbs up where you go out in the hall with your friend after a really hard test and you're just like, oh, I did so poorly. I'll never go to college. All that kind of stuff, right? Like I failed that. And you have no idea. You're just talking yourself out of the rest of the exam and you still have 3 really important sections left to go. So again, I just want you guys to remember that on the scale of the SAT, it's so important to understand, and it's really easy to understand, that every question that you decide that you're just going to give up on or you want to leave the test or whatever, that's 10 points. For every one that you have left, that's 10 points that you're just sacrificing for no other reason. And again, that's where that psychology and that endurance aspect comes through. You got to want to compete. You got to sit there and be like, you know what? Today's the day. I don't care what else is going on today. I can forget about this forever potentially as soon as I'm done. But for right now in this moment, I want to be as focused as possible. I want to endure this. I want to endure the test. And I want to give it everything I got until the very end of the exam. Because if I do that, I swear I'm convinced, just based on this easy math, right, that will earn you an additional 100 points if you just don't give up or you don't have that kind of lull in your brain activity. It's so, so, so important. Okay, cool, guys. It seems like everybody's good with that. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So if everybody can take a note on this endurance aspect and continue to remind yourself of this. Well, I'm not going to spend too much time on it today because we're going to do that to almost the entire video, this hype live stream that we have tomorrow. That's going to be spent almost entirely on getting you guys ready to go and psyched up, right? Whatever. Get fired up for the test. So as you guys go through this, it's going to be super important. Okay? All right, guys. You guys are going to be all right. Perfect. So we're good on time here. Let's keep going. Okay? So let's jump back here. I'm going to use. Let's see. Where can I take some notes here? Let's look at. I'm going to take notes on the top of the April 2019 test. Okay, so if you guys have seen our videos, we've done a full comprehensive video collection on the SAT April 2019 test. I don't know why that one got released, but it's the in-school exam. It's just one that hasn't been covered very often because it's not one of the tests that's released by the College Board or Khan Academy, so that's why we decided to do it. And it's gotten a lot of really positive responses, so that's the one we'll focus. I guess that's the one we'll take notes on, and then if you guys have general questions about the SAT reading section or any of the sections, I can try to go through it. I can try to use the April 2019 test as an example for them. Okay, so let's take a look at this. All right, guys. So you guys just see this is just in the top corner here. All right, so let's take a look at this. If you guys look at the reading section, so it seems like everybody's already very, very aware that the reading section is very hard. The SAT reading section, arguably, SAT reading, and I'll tell you why it's hard in a second. SAT reading and ACT math, those are the 2 hardest sections of the test, of either test. Arguably, you can make an argument, I think, for either one. The SAT reading test is so hard because it's so boring. Somebody just said it. Heroic just said it. It is very boring. I love to read. It helped me tremendously. This was my best section in high school. It was my best section, my best ACT section. It's the one section where if I read and put my head down and really focus for the time, I think I can get every question right every time. And that has nothing to do with what I came out of where I just decided one day that I was a great reader. It had nothing to do with given ability, okay? It is, I am not a genius by any means. I love to read, and that helps me on this reading test. And guess what? It also helps me on the writing and language test. So again, this doesn't necessarily apply if you are just taking the August SAT. If you're taking the August SAT and you're not taking the test after this, unfortunately, this isn't going to help you tremendously. But if you're taking another one after that, even if it's the September test, and you're a senior, over the course of the next month, it's so important to read more. This helps you so much on not only the reading section of either exam, but it helps you so much on the writing and language section as well. And let me show you why. If you guys take the writing and language test, most of you already know that that's largely based on grammar rules. And when you read edited, published works, there's a reason that there's something called an editor, right? An editor, although it doesn't seem like it, actually goes through and tries to correct for grammar errors, right, or errors. So when you guys read a lot and you read published text, I don't care what it is. If you're into sports and you read ESPN, great. If you're into plays and you love to read plays and playwrights, great. All of that is edited text. And so when you get to the writing and language section, a lot of the questions become like, you don't know why you think it's right, but it always is right, because you've always seen it correctly when you read something. And that's why the reading, I know everybody says like read more, but that doesn't really explain why you should read more. Beyond having, there's many studies that say that if you read more, you're going to be just a better all-around thinker. That's like a proven fact. But beyond that, for a test like this, it just helps you identify things subconsciously that you otherwise wouldn't. So again, this doesn't really apply if you're taking the test on Saturday, but if you're taking anything beyond this August Saturday test, please read more. I can't stress how important that was. The only reason I did well on these in high school was because I read a ton. I still read a ton today, and because my mom was a math teacher. That was it. If my mom wasn't a math teacher, I didn't have any work ethic. I didn't think about the next day, let alone college. I didn't have any work ethic. I was a horrible student, but I did well on these exams because I knew what the scale looked like. I knew basic concepts for Algebra 2 because my mom wouldn't let me not understand those, and I read a ton. And those three things only helped me do well in these exams. That's it. That's all you really need. So read more, read more, read more. I can't stress that enough. Okay? If you read more with if you read research papers, that's even, I mean, again, if you can get through it and you can comprehend it and you can stay focused on it, then that's going to help tremendously because, as you guys know, it's not like any of you probably wake up every morning thinking, I can't wait to read that pre-1900s history passage, right? Everybody knows that there's one of those on the reading test every time. It's like, that's not very fun to read. So if you're reading something very dense, like a research paper, then yeah, that's going to help you with that type of passage. Okay, so a couple things to think about on the reading test that can help you guys with your strategies. The first thing is potentially reordering the passages. Now, that doesn't mean you have to reorder the passages. But we talk about this a lot in our classroom programs, that if you have taken enough practice tests, what I would do is I would sit down and take a practice test, but I take it passage by passage. And this can probably be applied by this Saturday's test. You sit down and you set the timer, you set a stopwatch, so stopwatch, right? Passage 1, right? And like Sarah just said, right? It doesn't have to be. Let me back up real quick because Sarah's a great example of this. Sarah didn't need my help in any way when she was in these programs a couple years ago. She did not need my help in any way on the math section. We talked about it very briefly, and we'll talk about it today, the strategy that potentially helped her just so that she could stay focused. But when we came to the reading section, because Sarah wasn't a big reader outside of this, we had to make sure that she read more. So when Sarah says it, for those that just saw her comment in the live chat, this is coming from somebody, again, that scored within 20 points of a perfect score on the SAT and got a perfect score on the ACT. And again, that's not to say that everybody needs to get that, but Sarah was somebody who needed to read more in order to do well in the reading section, and she put her mind to it. She didn't have too much pride in her own ability, being like, well, I can already read. I already know this. You know, I can do more than that. I don't need that. Instead, she was like, you know what? I could probably read more, and I think that's probably going to help. And ultimately, that's what lends itself to an extremely high score on this exam is when you listen, because some of you are definitely going to be smarter than me that watch this. There's no question. That doesn't mean that you know more than me on the SAT. In fact, I can guarantee that you don't know more about the SAT test and how it works than I do. That has nothing to do with my natural mental ability. It has everything to do with me just combing through tests, unfortunately. Again, can't believe I'd be doing that at 17 years old. But if you apply these things, I promise they work because we've had so many students know that they work over the years that you guys can just apply them and not have too much pride, and you will do well on this exam because the concepts, especially beyond the reading section, are not very hard. Reading, unfortunately, as you guys have already talked about, is somewhat difficult, unfortunately, especially if you're not a big reader. I can't stress that enough, that you need to be a big reader outside of this, particularly on the SAT. It's less important on the ACT because those passages are a lot easier. But I would just set the timer. I'd write it out like this. If you haven't taken a practice test before in this way, I would definitely do it, especially practice reading. Passage 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Set a stopwatch, not a timer, because the timer ticks down and that provides stress and anxiety. And just tell us and stop it when you're done and you feel like you've 100% definitively answered every question accurately, no matter how long it takes. And pretty soon, if you do this 2 or 3 times, you're going to have, this is 12 minutes. Oh, actually, this is only 9 minutes. I found that passage number 2 is pretty good for me. I like that one. And when you do this enough, you figure out which passage is best for you. For example, this is going to sound ridiculous, but I actually love that pre-1900s passage, and only because it tends to deal with U.S. history. There's a lot of U.S. history passages or British history, and I love that subject matter. So I actually like reading that one. It's not my absolute favorite of the 5, but it's definitely better than number 1 for me. And so again, for anybody that's seen our videos on the SAT reading test where I take it in real time, I'm never stressed. Even if this first passage takes me 15 minutes, but I'm 100% accurate, I do all the passages in order just because I have a pretty good understanding of where I'm good and where I'm not so good. And this is always the first one, and this is always the hardest one for me. Generally speaking, if you don't want to start with your hardest passage and that happens to be passage number 1, then just don't, right? Go to passage number 2. The reason I love this test so much and that I've dedicated so much time to it is because I really truly believe that this test helps you become an independent thinker. It helps you think to yourself, okay, I don't have to do this. And those people that are creative, that can find ways around a problem beyond just thinking, okay, this is how I have to do this. If you can find ways around the problem, it's not like I'm going to be over your shoulder being like, wait a second, why did you start with passage number 2? Nobody's going to be doing that, right? So if you start with passage number 2 because that benefits you the most, that makes you an independent thinker. And that's where this becomes so valuable in terms of being a great test taker and a great, having the ability to go through and actually identify which one is best for you. Not which one's best for the nation, not which is the national, the best average, whatever. What's best for you? And that was my biggest advantage as a kid taking these tests, is I didn't really listen to anybody, and that's a horrible trait with everything else that I did. I should have listened to more people, and now I'm telling you guys, it's kind of it's ironic that I'm telling you to listen to me, because I didn't listen to anybody. And part of the reason I say to listen to me is because I made all the wrong decisions, made bad mistakes, right, where you're not focused on the things you should be focused on. And then when you're 23, 24 years old and you realize, like, oh my God, people have been working much harder than I have, you play catch up then for too long. And so if you guys can implement these strategies and implement this hard work and independent thinking before you turn 25, that's going to be a huge advantage. You're going to be way ahead of 99% of the students out there. So that's what I want you guys to take away from that idea. Okay, yeah, guys, in terms of amount of studying, so let's keep going with the reading section real quick, but in terms of amount of studying, I think there's a very fine line between doing too much and too little. I probably would say maybe an hour a day leading in like the 2 weeks before the test, because I think that if you do an hour dedicated work where there's no phone, there's no computer, because that's another thing that I used to do all the time is I would say like, oh, I studied for 6 hours, and I would be on my, like phones didn't really exist. Phones didn't really exist that time in the way that they do now. But like if you're not dedicated to the way you're studying, then that's really not going to be that applicable. So if it's 3 to 4 hours of dedicated study, you are going to be way ahead of the curve. If you can do 1 hour where it's really focused, that's still going to be a huge, huge help. The order of the passages are, again, they don't actually say that they're consistent. They don't definitively tell us that the College Board says that they're going to be consistent every time. But generally speaking, they are. And generally the first one is there's always, I shouldn't say that the College Board doesn't say what order they're necessarily going to be in, although it tends to follow a specific order. But there's always going to be one narrative, right? One narrative passage. There's going to be 2 historical. And there's going to be 2 science, right? With the ones with like the data, the graphs. So it's not always consistent. I don't want to make that statement. But even in that sense, generally speaking, it goes narrative, like social science, historical. Social science like a social science, like something about population growth or something like that. Then historical again, I think, and science. I have to confirm that. We can look through this in a second. But this is the general order. So using this strategy, you can still determine which types of questions there are. So in writing, in terms of the writing and language score, if you guys are struggling or if you feel like you're a bit off on the writing and language test, make sure that you go back and try to remember punctuation grammar rules. if you can review grammar rules for the writing and language section, then when you get to those like rhetorical skills or main idea organization questions, you have so much time to go back and reread because the grammar questions only take like 10 to 15 seconds. So especially going into this August test, my recommendation if you're looking for some help with that writing and language stuff is to make sure that you go back and review grammar rules because that will help for the entire test. So yeah, what was it? So this is the historical one, extremist politics. So it goes, narrative, historical, or social science, I guess, social studies. And then what's next? Science, right? Yeah, so science is next. So narrative, history, science, then history again. So yeah, narrative, history, science, history, science is generally the order of the 5 passages. If you guys have any questions about that? Yeah, so John, they are mixed in. I think generally speaking, I found that it goes narrative, social studies, like social science, then science for real science, then historical. Generally that like pre-1900s one is the historical one, and then science again at the end. Good. It's a great question in terms of consistency on that. So guys, in terms of strategy on the reading section, and again, this is SAT. Sarah, is there any way, I don't know if you heard me on this one, but Sarah, is there any way that you could post the April 2019 test? If you just search April 2019 SAT on Google, it's from maine.org is the one that released the test. So you can find that and you guys can then follow along with the video. But here's what I want you guys to remember. I am very adamant on the SAT reading section that you guys read every question. That you read every passage. I'm very adamant about that, and let me explain why. There are 2 strategies on this test, realistically, right? There are 2 strategies. One is 2 strategies. Right? One is to read thoroughly and then trust your reading on the question. That is the one that I am a huge proponent of. And I'll explain why in a second. The second one is to either skim or go look at the questions, but ultimately you end up just skimming and looking for the information that you find in the question. Skim and look for information. You either skim before you read the questions, you skim after, but ultimately you're just skimming to find information. Skim and look for info presented in the questions. I'm a huge advocate of number 1 for 2 reasons. Okay? I'm a huge advocate of number 1 for 2 reasons. The first is that the section is called reading. There has been so much made of this test over the years, like, oh my God, if I don't get this score. If I didn't tell you that 1600 was an SAT score, that's just a made up number. It really is. It's just made up. It's not like Isaac Newton didn't say like, you know what a perfect score for a standardized test would be? That would be a 1600. No, it's just made up. And so when we get into the mindset of like, I got to get this score because my friend got this score or my my parents are, that takes us out of what this test really is. And again, ultimately, this first section is called reading for a reason. They're not trying to trick you with that. It's not like the SAT was like, you know what, let's call this reading. But in reality, it should be called the skim and then look at the questions, or look at the questions and then skim section. No, it's called the reading section. Now, right now, you might struggle a little bit with the reading because it's very dense. On the SAT, the reading section is very dense. But a really easy way to practice that is just to read more, as we've already talked about. So that's the first component, is that by reading more, you don't overcomplicate anything. Okay, you don't overcomplicate it. If you read the full section, you're not overcomplicating it. You're not trying to look for stuff. I worked for a company one time that had us like trying to make students highlight question types. And while that can be beneficial, highlighting, that's ultimately just a way to make more money for the company, right? That's highlighting question types and learning every highlighted question type is going to take you, 100 hours. And so that's not a good way to think about this. Instead, if you simplify everything and you realize that even the boring, dense passages like this one, Edmund Burke, that's just coming. You'd probably read Reflections on the Revolution in France. You'd probably read that in an AP US history class, or at least discuss it. A lot of the passages are just coming from a US history or AP US history class. And guess what? Who makes the AP US history test? That would be the College Board, who also makes the SAT. So they're not trying to confuse you. Yes, these are dense, but reading more will help you tremendously. So I highly encourage you guys to just read more, because then that density becomes way, way less of a factor. The second reason is that by reading thoroughly, and this is reading the passages thoroughly, it builds consistency. So I'm not gonna sit here how do you spell consistency? Right? I'm not gonna sit here and tell you guys that we have never had a student do well with the skim method. I know students can do well with this, but what generally happens is they'll do really well on one test, and then on the very next test, even that skim method, they go down 100 points. And the reason for that is because when you don't understand the passage, if you get into that mindset of like not really knowing what the passage is talking about, but you're trying to skim so you save time by not reading it, it's so easy to have a total breakdown, total mental breakdown. And think about it, it's at 8:30 in the morning on a Saturday. How many of you have woken up at 8:30 in the morning on a Saturday in the last year, then read diligently for an hour and answered a bunch of questions on the reading? How many of you guys have done that on Saturday morning at 8:30 in the morning? Like that is going to make, if there are any issues with those passages that you're skimming and that you get into that mode of like, I don't know what they're talking about here. It is so easy to go on a downhill trend, right? Like you can fall really quickly. But when you read thoroughly, even if it means you can only get to 4 out of 5 of the passages, right? Let's say you only answer 41 out of 52 questions. Well, let me show you what that would mean. If you read thoroughly, 41 out of 52 passages, if you read and you're very accurate on those, right? And we always say accuracy is so much more important than just finishing every question. Let me show you what that means in terms of the scale. Okay, yeah, John, it's pretty funny, right? The videos will pop up. So let me just bring this up real quick. If you guys look at this, I think I have the April, maybe now. I'll go back to the scoring for practice test 3. To try to ease any of your concerns or any of your fears, guys, let me show you what happens if you answer 4 out of the 5 passages, okay? So if you're very accurate and you thoroughly read because you know how to read, and yes, heroic, if you haven't tried both methods, I'd definitely try them. Although, again, from a consistency standpoint, I would highly recommend to just read more and read thoroughly, because when you do that, as Sarah can attest to, when you do that, it might not happen overnight, and it might give you some anxiety at the beginning, but by the end of it, if you read more and then you commit to that strategy on the SAT reading test, you end up having a floor way higher than if you just skim. The skim method can have a really high ceiling, but can have a really, really low floor, because if you get that moment of kind of freaking out where you don't know what the passage is talking about and you just start scrambling, you can just go downhill really quickly. So it can work, but it has a super low floor, and we've seen that from students, right? So we've seen that from students. But most importantly, guys, let me show you what this means. This is the reading section. So if you guys haven't seen a scale, right, it's the middle score, and this is from test number 8 again. Okay, so this is from test number 8. And if you guys look at this, right, if you get 41 questions right, 41, so you're consistent, 4 out of 5 passages. Look at this, 310, right? This is so classic SAT, College Board, just making things so much harder than they need to be. If you guys are ever wondering how this is graded, why they didn't just put this as 400, I have no idea. You literally go down and you multiply it by 10 later on, but they just make everything so much more complicated than it needs to be. If you want to think of this 31, that's a 310, right? And then you add that to the writing and language score. So let's say you get 370, and that gives you the 680 for the reading, writing, and language score, if you guys are ever wondering what that is. So if you answer 41 questions correctly out of 52 on the reading test, you're at a 310. That puts you, like on the reading test, that probably puts you in the top 10 to 15% of all students that take the reading section. But it gets better. There's more. Just wait, right? It's like an infomercial. There's more. Okay, if you guys answer 41 questions and you don't have time for the final passage, if you look back and you guess the same letter down, again, psychologically, is this difficult to do? Yes. Is it impossible? No. Let me show you what happens. Okay, let's just take the last passage as an example. If you commit to a letter, and I always recommend using the letter that you've used the least. So let's say you're 41 out of 41 here, right? And we say that you didn't get to you're saving the last passage to guess. If you just commit to a letter, and again, the letter that you've probably guessed the least to that point, and you can just quickly look back at your bubble sheet and be like, oh, that column doesn't look like it's very filled in, so let me guess that letter. If you guess C as an example on the final 10 questions, or final 11 questions of the final passage, you answer 4 additional questions right. Okay, so by committing to accuracy, committing to reading, and really focusing on this, all of a sudden, you go to 45 and you get to a 340 on the SAT reading section, right? You get 45 out of 52 questions. And it seems so illogical because in school, we never think about it this way. Right? You never, yeah, so that's yeah, so that last comment, a really smart person I know who gets 1,600 takes 7.5 minutes to read. That's a lot of time to read, but I can't encourage that enough. That if you really thoroughly read, even if you can't get to the last passage or your worst passage, if you've practiced, you already know that's your worst passage. So you already know that's going to take you the longest, it's probably going to be the hardest, most likely to have errors on that passage. And if you guess on that one, you've answered 41 out of 41, and then you guess 4 additional questions, right? You get 45 out of 52. That's that's in the top 5 to 7% of the country, and you didn't even answer the last passage. So I think it's really, really important on that note to continue to remember that this method, that reading is the one section that doesn't really have a method. It doesn't really have, you can't review a ton of concepts. You can just read more. And if you do read more, if you commit to that and then you commit to being great at the reading section because you're committed to reading, you just won't, your ceiling score is really high and your floor score is really high. You really can't, you'll know exactly what you're going to get going into pretty much every reading test. And that's why I'm so adamant about reading the entire passage rather than skipping around and trying to find line numbers, all that kind of stuff. I would annotate for sure. I don't know if you need to write in the margins, but I definitely make notes, underline things as I'm going. It's another great question. Another great question. Okay. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I want to cover. I'll try not to cover anything specific, in terms of question types. We have other videos out on question types. We may have even posted. I don't know if we post them below. I don't know if they're posted below this. Anyway. Yeah, I think mini annotations are great, John. I think that's perfect. I don't think you have to overthink it, but I don't think you want to underthink it either. I think mini annotations will just help you stay focused, right? It'll help you comprehend. And ultimately, when you comprehend things, then you can trust your reading. So I guess that's kind of the last thing I want to talk about with this reading section is if you're going to use this strategy, it doesn't work to what we call split strategies, right? You can't split the strategies. You have to commit to one, and I mean that very sincerely. That you go with one or the other. I really don't care which one you go with. I think that I've already listed out the reasons why I think you should go with read the full passage. But if you go with the other one, that's fine too. But you can't split the strategies. Okay, so what I mean by that is if you're going to read thoroughly, whoops, let me switch over here. If you're going to read thoroughly, okay, then you got to trust your reading. Okay, the whole premise of this, trust your reading. The whole premise of this is that you're going to read thoroughly so that you understand it so the questions are easier, that you don't have to go back. But you got to trust your reading. If you split the strategies where you read thoroughly and then on every question you have to go back, you're going to run out of time really, really quickly. So you got to trust your reading. The idea is that if you read thoroughly, you comprehend that there's only 90 lines per passage, right? If we look at a reading passage, there's only, how many lines? This one has 75. Now this one has a few graphs as well, but let's call it 75 to 100 lines of double-spaced text, right? We have a column, 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 column. It's double-spaced, really, because it's 2 columns. And so it's 90 lines of 2-column text. If we have to be able to read, and that's where we have to read and read thoroughly, and that will help you tremendously as you go through the reading section. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Yeah, trust your reading. That's a huge one, right? If you're going to use that strategy, you got to trust it. You got to make sure that when you get to the questions that you're like, oh yeah, I do remember reading that. Oh, I don't remember reading that, and it was only 90 lines of double-spaced text, so I think this has to be the right answer. I'm going to eliminate these ones because I just don't remember them talking about that at all. And I especially don't remember them talking about it as it's related to this question. Okay, guys, so can everybody give me a thumbs up? Does that all make sense? Any other questions? Can everybody just give me a thumbs up generally on the reading section? Yeah, absolutely, John. Yeah, no problem. I'm super glad that's why we do these videos, and I'm super glad that helps. Because if you've seen our other videos of me reading, I promise this works. one of the things that always frustrated me about just about this whole like tutoring industry, all this stuff, and the reason that we started this whole live streaming and trying to help you guys as many ways as we can is because it always frustrated me that people seem so tutors and teachers that they seem so sure of themselves, and then I would watch them do practice tests, and I'd be like, well, you're not very good at it. Like, yeah, one person can sit down at any given time and like really hone in and focus on one test. Like, there are so many different methods. So when we think about this, I try to be as objective as possible. And that's why I bring up that there are two strategies. And I try to give you guys the reasons that one is going to work more consistently than the other one and how you guys can get better at that one strategy. But it doesn't mean that there aren't other strategies that work. It just drives me crazy when people are so sure that's the exact opposite of being an independent thinker. When you're so sure that your method is the only method, or that, yeah, you got to do it this way. That's the exact opposite of how I took these tests in high school or how I take them now. I'm showing you guys hopefully some things that the reasons I think that there are that you should do it one way or the other. But ultimately, it's your decision, right? You guys got to make the call, and that's why we put out these videos of me showing these strategies in real time when I'm just as stressed as I know you guys are. It hopefully helps you guys see, like, it doesn't get any easier. This is still a stressful test at every level, and I want you guys to know that it's still stressful for me to have to read and think and be that focused. If you're not exhausted after taking the SAT for 3.5 hours, then you probably weren't focused enough, because it is exhausting. It's exhausting to take one section, and so you got to be ready to go. You got to have that inner fortitude to be like, you know what, I got this today. I can go take a nap. I can go do whatever after this. But right now, I want to be super focused. I want to be in this. I want to be here, and I want to answer this next question so that I compete against everybody else in the country, and I know I can beat them. That was the advantage that I had. That's how I thought. If the students were sitting next to me in the room in high school, or even now, I would look to the side and be like, I can beat that person. And it was very much a sense of pride in terms of being able to endure even when I got tired. And that's how I want you guys to take this exam. It's going to be stressful. You're going to have anxiety. There's nothing that I can do about that. But in some ways, that helps you focus because it means you care. And so if you can take that care and get that fine line between, I care too much and I just want to give up, between those 2 points is a phenomenal way to be a great test taker. Okay, so that's a great question. Yeah, honestly, so great question about minor people in passages. I actually think that the minor person comes up more often than so let me give you an example. I remember this from, can't remember the exact passage, but it sparked Celia, right? One afternoon, I came over to Celia's apartment. I remember reading this from back when we filmed that real-time video. They talked about, so this is like something with her son or something, nothing at all, like his brother Rafa. Somebody's son is Rafa. And that comes up one time, but it comes up in the question. So I think minor characters are actually more important to underline than any major character, because that's generally going to be something that's brought up in the question. Think about it this way too, guys. For the reading section, if you only have 75 to 100 lines of text that are double spaced, and there are 10 to 11 questions, you're coming up with a question every 7.5 to 10 lines, right? There's going to be a question that's asked if you do the math. And so when you think about it that way, you're like, man, there's going to be a lot of questions coming up. So if the whole passage is based on in this case, two women's relationship, they can't just keep asking about the two women's relationship because that's the whole point of the passage. They have to ask about something specific. And again, if it's a minor character and the relationship that the minor character has to one of the women or whoever it is, it's probably pretty likely that that's going to come up in a question. That's how I like to think about this. And if you see enough of these passages, you start to get to a point where you're just like, oh yeah, that's got to be a question. I feel like that a lot when I do these reading sections, and especially in the real-time ones. I could never see the reading test ever, and having just read enough, you're like, well, that's probably a good question. Just reading anything, I'm like, that could be a question somebody asked me about this test. Right? Taking something like that seriously, you start to realize what the questions are probably going to be before they even are asked. It's a good question about minor characters in the passage. Again, let me just go back to this example to clarify it one last time. Like, this whole thing is about two women, right? Two women in their relationship. They're both, I think they're both from Panama, and they've moved. I think they've moved to the U.S. I think that's what this is about. But one of the women asks about the other woman's sons, and so yeah, if the sons are brought up, it's probably pretty likely that they're going to be brought up in the questions in some way, or there wouldn't be really a point in including them in this passage. And so that's where those minor characters become pretty big. It's a very specific question, but a very good one at the same time. All right, guys, so let's keep going. Everybody good with that? Can everybody give me 2 thumbs up if you guys are in the chat? Can you guys just give me 2 thumbs up to make sure that you guys are good with the reading section? We do have to keep moving because we don't have unlimited time. And if you guys have any questions after this, please make sure that you comment below this video. And we've already made it a point with our teachers and teaching assistants to make sure that we answer those questions. So let's try to move on from the reading unless there's something more general that applies to everybody. But if not, just feel free to ask your question in the comments section below this video. And we'll be happy to answer them in written form. Okay, so that's great. Yeah, so yeah, guys, we're going to go over the writing language section now. So, good question. So, I did some math here for the writing and language section, and that seems counterproductive to what you guys would expect for the writing and language section. But what I found is that not a lot of, this just sounds so ridiculous for a standardized test like this, but not a lot of let me just put it this way. Most people aren't full-time tutors or teachers that do this all the time. And what I found is that even as I got trained with other companies and to learn about this test is that the people that were even talking about it, especially as I look back now and know a lot more about these exams, I'm like, I don't really think they knew much about the exam beyond just what they're being told. And so like a lot of this stuff doesn't really, there wasn't a way to like necessarily communicate that in a good way to students. So everything that we try to do in these programs and kind of me trying to take the lead with our teachers and teaching assistants and teaching them is everything that I've learned over the years in terms of just breaking down these tests as closely as I have. And here's what I came up with. Okay, we're, by the way, guys, we're moving on to the writing and language section. Writing, you spell writing. Probably should not use the writing, language. Okay, so if you guys look at the writing and language section, one of the things that I came up with is that there are two question types, right? There are grammar questions, and if you guys want to know the grammar rules that are most covered, I would definitely review punctuation. I would definitely review subject-verb agreement. You guys would be shocked, but like, does anybody remember that Schoolhouse Rocks video? Am I getting too old for this? Where it's like conjunction, junction, what's your function? I say this in a lot of the live streams, but it's a good thing I'm not a professional singer or pursuing professional singing. Okay. So if you guys remember that video, that is talking about the grammar that shows up on the SAT, and this is what I'm going back to in terms of like, we don't need to complicate it. This is talking about 6th grade grammar. Okay, and I don't mean that in a way to like try to demean you guys, because I demean myself in the same way and saying like we should all know this, and if we practice the grammar, we can all get better at this. This is the one section that everybody should be able to improve upon, because it really is talking about a very, very just basic English grammar. So subject-verb agreement is another one. Okay, subject-verb agreement, pronouns. Pronouns are really important. I'm trying to think if there's any. Like verb tense comes up, but that you guys generally know that one. What else? Pronouns. Like run-ons, but that kind of goes, it's like a subcategory of punctuation. Run-on sentences. Okay, so like those guys, right? Run-on sentences. John, I'm glad that, I think that means that you've seen that Schoolhouse Rocks video. For those that haven't seen it, I encourage you to look it up. Type in conjunction, junction, what's your function? Like an old 80s animated video trying to teach students how to learn their conjunctions. But everybody knows it, and that's what's being taught right here. Oh, transitions, that's a good one. Yeah, transitions, another good one. Thank you. Transition words. That's a great one. Yeah. So those are great ones to review. And the reason, again, going back to this idea of the math section, okay, there are 44 questions on the writing and language test, and you get 35 minutes to complete those. 44 questions, 35 minutes. So that should know this, but 44, nope, that's wrong. 35 divided by 44. You get what? Like 50 seconds a question. Let's just call it 50 seconds. You get like 50 seconds per question. But what I found, and again, this kind of goes back to what you guys can continue to work on, especially if you're taking the test on Saturday. In order to improve, every one of these writing and language questions is still worth 10 points. Right? It's not, generally speaking, it's not worth any less or more than something you find on the math or something you find on the reading. And there's a slight variances to that, of course, but you still get 10 points. And if you're talking about 6th grade basic grammar, that should be something that you can definitely review really quickly. But what I have found, and it kind of goes hand in hand with this, is if you do review your grammar and you have that down so well, if there are, let's say there's 40 questions, there are 30 questions, okay, so let's just do the math here. There are 30 questions that are grammar-based. My question to you guys, I guess I'll ask it now, and then how long, if you know a grammar rule, right, if you know, like, it's just those ones that have no change as an answer choice, you guys know what I'm talking about, right, no change, and then there's like a verb that's underlined, or there's a piece of punctuation that's underlined. If you know the grammar rule, how long does it take to answer that question? So grammar questions, there's about 30 of those. Then there's about 14 questions that are those main idea organization where it's like, should the author add this sentence? Should it be deleted? Which of these is the most specific answer? I don't know why I wrote down order, main idea. Passage order, right? Sentence structure, let's call it order, I guess. It's kind of order and structure, maybe. Okay, how long does it take, though, to answer those grammar questions? If you really know these rules, like if you have them down completely, it probably takes you 10 seconds, right? Let's say 10 to 15 seconds to answer each one of the grammar questions. 10 to 15 seconds. Can everybody give me a thumbs up if they agree? Like if you really know the punctuation rule, you know what you're supposed to do, it probably takes 10 to 15 seconds to answer that question. Okay, so thumbs up if you agree with me. And the reason I bring that up is because let's extrapolate that for a second, right? And this is why, hopefully this gives you guys some motivation to memorize every grammar rule. Yeah, perfect, John, you're exactly right. Every grammar rule that's ever shown up on, going back to our book, and again, this is comprehensive, it's not for everybody, but it does cover every single thing that you could find on the SAT, including every grammar question and rule that we've ever seen. And it gives you 5 grammar questions per subject. So like there's 10. There's 10 questions related to punctuation, 10 related to subject-verb agreement, 10 related to transitions. And so the reason this helps so much is that if you have all of that book from the writing and language perspective memorized, and we extrapolate this out from 30 questions, if each of the grammar questions takes you between 10 and 15 seconds, and let's even be conservative here and say 15 seconds, 50 seconds minus 15 seconds, right, versus if you didn't know them and you got 50 seconds to answer it, if you have every grammar rule down and you're just like boom, 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 and you can move through these really quickly, that's 35 seconds per question. Okay, 35 seconds per question. If you guys do the math, that's 1050. That's 1,050 seconds total, which is greater than 15 minutes. That's pretty crazy math, okay, in terms of what that means. On these main idea and organization questions, it is so important to reread. And if you're stressed for time, it's hard to convince yourself in the moment to actually go back and reread. But guess what? If I gave you guys 15 plus minutes to actually go back and reread these questions, these are extremely easy if you have time to reread the context. Extremely easy questions. Basically, these just come down, they're just like basic reading comprehension questions, but they're way easier than the reading test. Now, are they difficult if you don't get a chance to go back and reread? Absolutely. But if you give yourself 15 plus minutes because you just know every grammar rule down to it, right, to a science, you're like, yep, that's the rule, I know what I'm supposed to do because there's a piece of, punctuation, there's a comma underlined or there's a semicolon underlined, what am I supposed to do? Boom, got it, moving on. It gives you 15 extra minutes to actually go back and reread on these questions and to not make simple mistakes on those rhetorical skills and main idea questions. That's crazy. That is crazy, crazy, crazy. 15 minutes if you just sit there and memorize grammar rules. Is that going to be fun? No. Did any of you guys wake up today thinking, man, you know what? I cannot wait to go memorize my semicolon rules today? No. I don't think anybody woke up thinking like that. Okay, but if there's a means to an end. If you do it, the result is going to be the result of memorizing 30 6th to 7th grade grammar rules, 6th to 7th grade grammar rules is going to be crazy in terms of what this means for your life. Because like it or not, and again, the argument on whether or not the SAT should be included as a college application thing can go on forever, literally forever. But for right now, let's call it even with test optional, you probably want to take this test. It's amazing that memorizing 6th grade grammar to me, and this is what I want to try to communicate to you guys, it's amazing to me how much that can help you on this test. just going back and memorizing every concept because it gives you so much more time on those rhetorical skills organization questions. And that's basically it, guys. If nothing else, there's nothing really else to talk about on the writing and language section. I wrote some questions here, but it's right. If grammar, ask two things: what is underlined and why, or what is being tested. So be really aware of what's underlined. So right, which choice helps establish? This is one where we do want to go back and reread, but from a grammar perspective, let's just go and find a grammar question here quickly. Yeah, like right here, right? Right away, we can say on number 5 that this is a punctuation question. Okay, this is punctuation. How do I know that? Well, I've taken a lot of time to go back and really focus on what's being asked. I see in the answer choices that there's pieces of punctuation, so there must be a punctuation rule. Right away, if you know these well enough, I can eliminate answer choices B and D. Okay, I don't remember this test. I don't even think that can't remember what this is. But without even looking, I know that B and D can't be right because I know these grammar rules inside and out. That a semicolon on the SAT is going to separate full sentences, right? 2 full sentences. That's what a semicolon is going to do on the SAT. Well, lo and behold, a period always does that as well. And so even if I don't know where this, even if I don't read anything, and the SAT loves to do this, they put a semicolon and a period in the same place on the same answer choices. This one cannot be right if this one is wrong. So they both have to be either right or wrong. We know there's only one correct answer on a multiple choice test. Without even reading anything, because I know these grammar rules and because I've seen this test enough, I can see, I know that B and D have to be off. That's not because I woke up. That's not because I was born one day or I woke up one day and I was like a grammatical genius. I misuse punctuation. I misuse grammar probably more than anybody, and especially when I talk, right? Or I think I suppose, especially when I speak. There's a good example of it, right? Especially when I speak, I'm like, I misuse this. But if I know these rules and I can apply them on a test like this, suddenly this becomes so much easier. Yeah, Sarah just said it. The trade-off is so worth it. Just spending time memorizing grammar rules equals a score increase. It truly is that easy. Okay, memorizing semicolon rules really does come down to, it's amazing to me. A semicolon rule is something you learn in like the 7th grade. It's truly, right? In order to write a 5-paragraph essay, a good 5-paragraph essay, they teach you what a semicolon does. And that somehow could set you up for the rest of your life. Is it, again, that can be argued forever, but as long as you guys know that now, you should probably take advantage of it. That's pretty sweet. That you can get unbelievable scholarship money and into great institutions and all this kind of stuff by simply having the desire and the work ethic to sit down and memorize semicolon rules. It's amazing to me. I mean, when you look at this test, there are so many things that you can take from this and being in that stressful environment, because when you get to something that you really love to do, okay, I don't think anybody, again, wakes up every morning thinking, I don't even do this. I don't even wake up every morning and think about this, and I do this for a living. It's not like I wake up every morning being like, oh man, I just cannot wait to answer more punctuation questions. That's just, that's just a good day. No, I don't do that ever, right? But instead, I think to myself, man, this could be a really big deal for me if I do well on this and I work hard in school and I have a great GPA. This could really change my life. I wish I would have remembered that as a kid. I was such a bad student that even this test and scoring well in this test didn't matter enough for me. And so if you can combine being a good test taker, which I know you can learn and I know I can teach it, with being a great student and having a great work ethic and putting in the time and the energy in school and in sports and in plays or whatever it is you guys do, if you can combine those two things, the sky is the limit. I would give anything going back to having great work ethic versus being a great test taker naturally, because this can be learned and this is way more difficult. It's way more difficult to convince yourself to work hard. So if you guys are working hard and you're just hitting that plateau and you can't figure out what you're doing wrong, keep pushing. Right? That when what's the saying? Somebody just posted, one of our teachers just posted on Reddit, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. Right? Keep pushing forward. Have that endurance. One more question. I got this. 10 more points. It's really easy to figure out how that equates to a 100-point increase with doing no other work other than just convincing yourself to stay focused for 3 hours. John, yeah, so it depends on how general that grammar question is. I don't have the March 2019 test in front of me. Can you maybe comment below the video? Yeah, John, just so we don't forget, can you just make a comment below the video asking that exact same question? And I either immediately after this or somebody will respond before Saturday for sure, 100%. But can you just so that we kind of keep it more general for the, I appreciate the question, and we're happy to answer it, but just, yeah, that'd be great. Thank you, man. That's great. Okay, so that's great. And again, I'm sure it's a good question. I always like answering the, like, and I know a lot of our teachers do too, answering very more specific questions, because we know that can equate to even higher scores. But yeah, just for the time being, let's keep going. So can everybody give me 2 thumbs up again? That's really all I have to say about the writing and language section. Yeah, that's really all I have to say. I think you guys are going to do great. If you guys commit, if it's not this week before the August test, if you guys commit to doing it before the September or October test or the November test, whenever it is you guys are taking it, if you commit to memorizing these grammar rules, you guys are going to be shocked at how well you can do on the writing and language section. And just for the record, that section is worth the same amount of points, right? 44 questions divided by 400 points, or the other way around. Man, it's been a long day, I guess. 400 divided by 44 points, because there's 400 points available for the writing and language. That's still about 10 points per question. So all of these questions are worth the same, but yet they're way easier from a concept standpoint. Okay, so that's great. So let's move on here, guys, to the last section, the math section. Okay, and I'm just going to generally talk about math. We're not going to go into both sections just because, whoops, there's our full math strategy laid out. I'm not going to go into both strategies because they're pretty comparable. Obviously, one you get a calculator, one you don't. But for the math test, right, there's 20 questions available on the math no calc section. And this is where, again, I'm convinced, without any full evidence of this, but with looking at these tests so often, there's 38 questions here, and there's 38 math with calc. Okay? Yeah, guys, for general tips for reading, if you guys can go back, just because we got to keep moving because it's a live stream, all of this is going to be recorded and posted immediately after. So by all means, please go back and definitely rewatch if you can. We talked about reading for a long time, so I highly encourage you guys, even if you saw the reading tips and stuff, definitely go back and check those out if you have time before the Saturday test. And again, all of this will be posted on our channel right immediately after this is done. I think you can even go back now, technically. You guys can go back to the beginning of the video. So math, no calc, math with calc. So again, without any full evidence of this, one of the things that I want you guys to see, and again, this is going back to the scale, there are 58 questions on the math test, right? But it's pretty easy to see 58, right? Here are the 20, right? Here's the 20 no calc, whoops. And 20 no calc, whoops, no calc. And 38 calc. And you guys will know that the calc test comes, right? The calc test comes second. So this is, let's see. Yeah, so this guy's is no calc, right? So if this test comes second, you guys will know with some easy math, right, that this is 1/3 of the overall score. And what we have found is that when students, especially students that find this section to be particularly difficult, that when you do 1/3, if that section becomes hard, it's so easy to want to give up. And that's a problem when 2/3 of the questions that are available for math are on the second part of the section. Okay? It's all about this section is double the points. And so when you think about it that way, again, that endurance aspect has to kick in because you're going to be tired by section number 4. There's nothing that I can really help you with on that. There will be there will be some exhaustion setting in if you're staying focused all the way through. Okay, so section number 4 is largely about willpower more than anything else. And so in order to help with that, one of the things, if you guys have seen some of our videos from math in the past, one of the things that we've developed is this pass strategy. Okay, 3 pass. And objectively, the best test takers in the world will use this strategy. Okay, the best test takers in the world should use this strategy. And the only reason I say that, it's not because I think it's the most genius strategy in the world, but what we've developed with this pass strategy, and if you can perfect it, it's probably not good to try it now if you're taking the August test. Well, in some ways it is. The concept overall is good to think about. But what we've really developed is that you're looking at a first pass where you answer only the easiest question. You go all the way through. So like taking the no-calc section as an example, you go all the way through and you go through 1 through 20, and you skip any time-consuming or difficult questions. Even if it's a word problem that you know you can answer at number 2, you still skip it, at least off the bat. Because what we have found after combing through so many score reports from students in our programs is that it's amazing how many students miss one of the early questions from a simple mistake because it's a word problem. So you do the easiest, least time-consuming questions first. And you skip the other ones. Now, when you skip them, if you get good at this, and for those that have seen our math videos before, if you get good at this, you're going to, A, not make very many simple mistakes, but B, you're also going to only look at the best problems for you first. So it's almost like the first questions are a warm-up. If you get 10 out of 20 right here, you're probably going to have, for a great math student, you probably have 17 minutes because you only looked at questions that you 100% knew how to do. You time yourself on this because it's amazing how quickly you can move through questions where you don't have to think about them at all. When you just know, okay, there's a graph of functions, boom, got it, I'm done. Ready? Oh, there's assignment systems of equations. While I know that's going to take me a little bit to write out, at least I know exactly what to do, boom, done. And so you'll probably have for great math students, you could have 17 minutes left after 10 questions, which means you only have 10 remaining and you've gained a bunch of time there. And then you can always come back and on the pass number 2, you can always do harder, more time consuming. I don't want you guys to finish this after skipping 10 questions. I don't want you to go take a nap. But harder, time consuming questions can then be answered, right? You can come back to the beginning and start going through, even if it's number 2 that you skipped. I don't think number 2 is going to be very hard, but it is question if, let's say, number 2 is one with a word problem. It is one that's way more likely to make a simple mistake if it's a word problem than one that's just very straightforward. Like, let me give you an example of this. If I'm looking at these sections, and this was from our, like this question 2, think about how much time it takes to think about 2, 3, 5, and 4, really, right? So like only question number 1 is the only one I'd probably skip there. Because when you're just starting math, you've already completed a 65-minute reading test, a 35-minute writing and language test, and now you have to jump into a no-calc math test. Even though this one, Juliet rented a car for 1 day from a company that charges $80 per day, your brain is already starting to get fried there. Versus something that looks like this, which is truly just combining like terms, x squared plus 4x plus 7. How long did that take? I mean, less than a minute, less than 5 seconds, right? Same with this one. What is the function, right? If you see f of 1, we distribute 2x minus 2 plus 2, 2x, f of 1 is just 2. I hope I didn't make a simple mistake there. I don't think I did. Answer choice B. If you're only looking at the easiest questions first, and then you can always come back and look at question number 1, right? You can always come back and do that one. I don't think it's going to be very hard, but don't start with that one when it's already a word problem. That's the psychological aspect of this. And I'm actually thoroughly convinced that this is objective, by the way. If you can get good at this method, this is not one of those things that you will score better if you can master this pass method. And here's why. It's actually based on a thing I saw. I was a math major for a bit and then switched out. But this is actually based on a computer. It's a math algorithm that's heavily used in computer science called the sorting algorithm. Anybody's familiar with computer science? And what the sorting algorithm does is it goes through, like, think about levels of boxes, right? And you have short boxes and tall boxes, and it just scans through the levels of boxes, and it finds the shortest one. It does this over and over again rapidly, okay? And it goes through all of the boxes, it measures them, and it figures out which one's the shortest, and it puts it up front. And then now there's one, and it's forgotten about that one. And it goes through all the rest of the boxes, boom, boom, right? And it just keeps stacking them up. And the reason that this works so well, if you can master it, is because then think about these question types. You're just jumping from one box to the next. That was easy. That was a little harder. That was a little harder. Rather than all of a sudden starting with a really like time-consuming or word problem that's difficult, all of a sudden you're only looking at the easiest questions that are pertain to you, right? This is different for everybody. Some people know one thing better than another. If you can master this strategy, it's amazing how quickly your score can go up because you only look at the easiest questions first, and it's a lot less likely you make a simple mistake. Okay, so again, that's called the 3 pass, where you're trying to answer it. And then on the final pass, right, 3rd pass, you're guessing on questions that you didn't get to. And while it's not, you don't want to guess, but if you're going to guess, you want to guess on you've already determined at this point that these were going to be the absolute hardest questions that you didn't know how to do, right? And that's different for everybody. If those are the hardest questions that you didn't know how to do, then why spend any time on them anyway? Why not get 18 out of 20 right and leave 2 of them blank to guess on? Or if it's a free response, it's harder to guess, obviously, but take an educated guess. But at least you know you've hit your floor score of 18. You're not going below that number. Yeah, it definitely applies to the short answer as well. This whole thing applies to the short answer. I would go 1 through 20. Now, again, it's harder to guess on the short answer if you leave those for this final pass, if you leave those completely blank. It's obviously a lot less likely that you're going to get it right on the guess, but it absolutely applies to the short answer as well. Yep, great question. You can go through each question, and again, if you perfect this, everything that I try to say in these videos, if I'm going to make a definitive statement, I try to make a definitive statement that I know is objectively true. Here's what I know, is that every question on the math is equal. So there is no benefit to answering harder questions, zero. There's zero benefit. We've had students argue about this method, but those students, again, I don't know much, but I know a lot about these tests solely because I've looked at them for so long, that if you know that every question is worth the same value, why in the world would we not save the hardest questions that are particular to us? That's not necessarily to say number 15 is the hardest question for you. It might be for me, but it's not for you. But 14 might be easier for me than it is for you. So if you master this, you basically go through the entire math section only answering questions that you know how to do. If I were to tell you in school, okay, John, I'm going to use you as an example. Yeah, John, I don't think this is probably ready to go for Saturday. But John, here's what you can apply. So if anybody is looking at this and being like, man, I've done something else, here's what you can apply, John, in a really easy way that's basically this in general. If you see a hard question, John, that you look at, especially if you're a good math student, you should be able to determine which questions are difficult and which aren't. If you look at a hard math question and you're like, oh man, I know this is going to take me a while, it doesn't mean you have to do this as systematically as I just laid it out for you, John, but make sure that I would skip it. There's not going to be as many when you don't have this kind of method. But when you start to think about like, oh man, I've been spending, if you're at the 25-second mark and you're still trying to kind of figure out what you're supposed to be doing, like you're kind of guessing and checking already at the 25-second mark, leave it. You're going to end up guessing and checking anyway, you know that. And so you can guess and check at the end if you need to and if you have time. But if that was question number 10 and you have question number 18, that's the single easiest question, but by that time you start to get stressed because you haven't had a chance to see it yet, that's a huge issue. So John, again, I wouldn't recommend trying to implement this all together because like you said and like we've already talked about, it's going to be hard to do that before Saturday. But I would continue to think of this general thought of this pass method, which is to say you want to be fluidly moving through. You want to keep the momentum going. If you're like boom, 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 right, and you're just answering every question as you go, it's really easy to gain a lot of momentum from that, to gain a lot of time, to not lose much energy. And then you can always come back to the 2 or 3 hard ones that you circled. But you want to be very decisive in saying like, okay, this one's hard and I know this is going to take me a while. Let me move on real quick. And it doesn't have to be as formulaic as what I just laid out with this pass idea, but it can be helpful to skip problems as you go. Yeah, exactly, John, exactly. Cut your losses, right? Even if you want to do this and look at every question, that's okay. But when you get to a point where you're like 20 seconds in, 25 seconds in, and you don't really know where you're going with it, you got to move on. Cut your losses because you're not going to lose that much with 20 to 25 seconds. You're going to lose a whole bunch if you sit there and just toil away for 4 minutes without gaining any traction. And then you get frustrated. You don't know, with guessing and checking, you don't know at the beginning if you're going to get to the right answer anyway, definitively, because it's just guessing and checking, right, using the answer choices. If you're picking numbers like that, that's not a definitive way to solve it. While it can be really effective, it's also a way to get into that mode of like toiling away with a question for a long time, and we want to try to avoid that. Yeah, so David, good question about the reading. I wouldn't recommend it in the same manner as the reading, but if you guys are looking at the reading section, I would recommend just eliminating your worst passage, and essentially that's still that 3 pass. So let's say passage number 2 is your worst passage on reading because you've practiced and you've done that stopwatch drill that we talked about at the beginning. If you're doing it on the reading test and you eliminate passage number 2, if you get to it at the end, again, I don't want you to just take a nap if you have time to look at passage number 2 at the end. But if you do the first 4 passages, right, and you get 41 out of 41, and you leave that last one blank, the one that you find to be the hardest based on your practice, well, in effect, you're just leaving the hardest questions blank, or the hardest passage blank, the one that you struggle with the most, and you're answering all the easiest questions first. So in effect, it's the same idea, same method, it's just implemented in a slightly different way. It's a good question, though. Okay, I'm starting to get it. I'm just looking at some of these comments. All right, guys. So that's about it with the math section. I mean, again, the point of this comprehensive stuff is not to try to like overwhelm you guys. But can everybody give me a thumbs up if this all makes sense? Thumbs up if all this stuff makes sense. That's really all I wanted to talk about with the math section. Obviously, there are concepts that you want to review. So, like, I always like to look at triangles. Triangles, systems of equations, graphs of functions. Those three concepts will show up on every math test. And most importantly, linear. So y equals mx plus b. If you can have everything memorized about y equals mx plus b, you'll probably knock out 7 out of the 58 questions with just that knowledge. Just that knowledge. So those 4. So what did I say? Systems of equations. Linear functions. Linear functions first. Linear. Y equals mx plus b as much as you possibly can. Systems of equations. Triangles show up a lot. And graphs of functions show up a lot. Math calc section, I would say, guys, generally the math calc section is the biggest thing that everybody goes to is use your calculator. I actually do the exact opposite. The College Board actually openly says that every question on the entire math section, including the calculator section, can be solved without using a calculator. So my recommendation on the calc section is to minimize your calculator use beyond basic functions. So like if you're going to multiply, divide, you end up, unless you're an absolute master with a graphing calculator, and I'm talking about an unbelievable user of the graphing calculator, you don't really gain any advantage by trying to solve things in your calculator beyond just basic functions like multiplying. Like guessing and checking is you're just multiplying, right? Like divide, multiply, right? Beyond those basic functions, the thing that I would say to improve on the calc section is use your calculator less. That's something that always helps me, and write out more questions. Write it out. You'll see in those videos that we've done in the past on the math sections that I try to write out as much as I can on the test, because so let me use your calculator as an example. Going like this, right? Calculator, test, you're already doing that enough with the bubble sheet. You don't have to do more. If you're just focused writing stuff down on your test the whole time and you're focused intently on that, not going back and forth, even optically, that's going to help you, save time, but also lead to less confusion and less stress and anxiety related to that. Zara, way to calm your nerves. Sorry, I don't know if you asked that. I just see your message. If you're still looking for that question, I saw it and just didn't get a chance to answer yet. Calming your nerves is largely, and again, we'll talk about this during that live stream tomorrow, that hype video, but calming your nerve is going to be largely about warming up and realizing and being very aware of what you're about to do. So having a little bit of nerves is good, because it means that you care and it means that you're going to be focused when you get to the test. Being overwhelmed about a score is not good. One of the last thing that I want to leave you guys with, and again, if anybody has comments after this video, if anybody has comments or questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to comment below the video, because we can answer those. All of our teachers and teaching assistants will be answering those throughout the next 2 days leading into the test. But one of the things that you guys can do to calm your nerves is to recognize, again, and be really familiar with the score report. So let me explain what I mean by that. If you sit there and again, with this arbitrary, like I said, Isaac Newton didn't just wake up one day and was like, 1600 is the perfect score for a standardized test, but also 36 happens to be another great score. So if you don't make it a 36 or a 1600, you don't have a great standardized test. No, that never happened. Right? Instead, this is just a relatively arbitrary score when it's concerning students. One of the things that I want you guys to continue to think about is, rather than think about your score, 1600, never think about the score again. Ideally, what you want to think about is the number of questions answered correctly and how you get to that score. When we think about like, I got to get a 1400 or I'm not going to get into XYZ school, that's a myth, right? That's a mythological score coupled with a mythological thing that's going to happen in the future. A mythological concern that might not even come true anyway. You could get a 1600 and students still get rejected from Harvard with a 1600. So rather than thinking about it this way, what I want you to do, and I want this for everybody, is I want you guys to say, how many questions on a practice test do I want to get right? And lo and behold, if I answer 140 questions correctly, or let's even break it down further. On the reading section, I want to answer 40 questions correctly. That's my floor score. That's my goal. On any given test, I never want to go below 40 questions on reading out of 52. Right? On writing and language, I never want to go below 35 out of 44. I never want to, these are my, whatever, right? These are your goal scores that you can set for you. On math, no calc, right? I never want to go below a certain number, let's say 15 out of 20. And on math with calc, I never want to go below, 25 out of 38. If you set these goal scores for yourselves, it's really easy to figure out how you can answer those questions, because now that pass method that we just talked about with the math section, you're like, okay, 15 questions, that's my goal, and I've been able to do that on practice tests, so that's what I'm focused on. I'm going to go find the 15 questions that I know how to do so that I guarantee I get 15 right. And if the great test day, and those happen, where you just have a good test day, you're feeling great, and then the test kind of fits, you're a better geometry student than algebra student or vice versa, and you just happen to have a good test day, then by all means try to go for 20 out of 20. But if you set the floor score at 15 and you're not thinking about it as, I got to get a 1400, I need to go find 15 questions on the math no calc section that I know how to answer. So let me go find those, and then the score will take care of itself. That's a really easy way to think about it, and then reduce a ton of nerves, because you have an objective. It's not, oh my God, how am I going to get a 1400? It's, my objective is to get 15 questions right, and I know because I've looked at the scales enough, right? I'm talking about you guys. You've looked at the scales enough. You know what a 15 generally gets you, 15 and then 25 on the math. That would be 40 out of 58 total on the math. You know what that generally gets you, and if that's your goal score, boom, I got to go find the 40 questions that I know how to answer. And that's effectively what the pass method is in its essence, is just saying, like, I got to go find 40 questions I know how to answer. That makes it really, really easy to move on from 18 questions, right? If you set your goal score at 50, you know you have 8 question leeway, right? 8 question buffer or gap that when you see the hardest question and you know you have 8 to skip, you're like, boom, that was easy. I'll skip that one. The next 5 I know I can answer. Why would I spend time on that when I know I have 8 to give up? Okay, does that make sense? It's a huge, huge benefit if you guys can think about the test that way, rather than thinking about, if I don't get a 1500, I don't go to Harvard and I'm a failure. This is how I thought about it as a kid. And again, I was a horrible student who didn't have anything on their mind looking out into the future. And I still was able to do well on these tests solely because this is how I thought of it. I looked at the scales diligently. In fact, the reason I looked at these scales so diligently was because I was such a bad student that I would figure out exactly what I needed to get to keep a B-, or to not go below a C, or whatever, or to somehow struggle to get an A-. I knew I had to get this score, or to keep an A-. So I was wildly familiar with what this scales and what these minimums I had to get. And so I would look at these scales and I'd say, like, okay, 50 questions to get as an ACT test taker or as an SAT test taker, 50 questions gets me this on the math section. This is what I want to get. This is how many questions I have to answer. How do I figure out a way to get that? I was never going to be a 1600 student ever. Could I be a 1500 student? Yeah, because I could figure out enough questions that I could answer to get that score. 1600 requires a lot of extra thought and effort, right, to get those hardest possible questions right. And I just never had the work ethic. But to get a 1450, 1500, you guys can put in the time and the effort, and you should be able to get there with work ethic. We've had a student that started, we had one student one time, this is where I'll end it on a positive note, okay? Yeah, so heroic, absolutely, on the 3-pass. It's definitely going to be, we have some videos where I've taken the real-time tests using that 3-pass method. So anybody that wants to check that out in real time and seeing how it's implemented on the test, please do so. It's on our channel. Check it out. But last thing that I'll leave you guys with, we had a student one time who started out at a 970. Okay? Her name is Rachel. She's now studying data science. I won't tell you guys where, but she's studying data science. If you get a 970, that's the national average. That's right around the 50th percentile. It might be slightly above. But the reason I bring her up is because by no means would somebody have called her a naturally great test taker. After meeting her, I've never seen somebody work harder in my entire life. And she listened to everything. She trusted me, for better or for worse. She trusted me in what I was saying. And she was in one of our programs, and she set a goal that she was going to try to get a 1500 plus score. Now think about that. If somebody told you you had 970 to start, and they told you I'm going to get a 1500 plus score, you'd be like, yeah, okay. I've never seen somebody work harder, and over the course of a year, a little bit longer than a year, she set it to herself that she was going to memorize one new concept a week, and once she had it memorized, once she had it down, she was never going to forget that concept. That meant that she was going to knock that off of the 154 questions, right? Let's say there are 154 concepts. I don't know how many there actually are, but she was going to work hard enough to knock out one concept a week. She improved her score, I kid you not, by 540 points, and she finished with a 1510. I've never seen anything like it. By no means. So it's what frustrates me after seeing how hard she worked, because it's a disservice when somebody says they're not a great test taker. And I don't mean that in a bad way if you've said that about yourself before, but I want you guys to realize that nobody would ever say that this starting score, I don't mean that in a bad way, but I'm trying to say that's the national average. So everybody, I hear all the time students say right off the bat, and they've almost talked themselves out of this to begin with, they're like, well, I can't do well because I'm not a naturally great test taker. That's just not the truth, and I know it now, and so after seeing this, I always just want to keep you guys positive and keep you guys encouraged, because if that's the case, if she can do it, I know you guys can as well. Is it going to be hard work? Absolutely. Is it going to stink? Yes. Are you going to have to sacrifice things that you don't want to have to sacrifice, like fun, like stuff that I didn't sacrifice for, and I had the fun, and it didn't result? Trust me, right? It doesn't work out very well. That you guys can look at this 1510 and use her as an example that it can be done, and you guys can work hard enough to have these massive score increases. And if you think about it that way, anything can be done. You just got to keep working hard. We'll keep the positivity up. We'll keep you guys excited and hyped up about this test. But give it everything you guys can have on Saturday. I know you guys are going to do great. Can everybody give me one last 2 thumbs up in the chat if you guys have been paying attention and listening? Can everybody give me 2 thumbs up if everything makes sense? Don't forget that we do have that SAT hype video tomorrow. That's going to be at 2 p.m. Pacific, U.S. Pacific, 2 p.m. U.S. Pacific tomorrow. And we'll try to go for an hour. We'll just try to get you guys pumped up for the test, give you some last-minute warm-up stuff you can do before on test day, and then and give you guys some things that you need to have ready the night before to keep the stress down on, when you wake up on test day. Okay, guys, I really hope that was helpful. I hope you guys gained some knowledge and gained some thought from this video and this live stream. We want you guys to all do well. We really believe in this positive encouragement and this work ethic that you guys can keep putting forth. If you guys have any questions for us beyond the video, just make sure that you comment below. One of our teachers and teaching assistants will answer those questions and comments before Saturday, especially if you guys let us know you're taking the test on Saturday, so there's some urgency. Otherwise, guys, I wish you guys the best of luck on the test on Saturday or whenever you guys are going to take it in the future. Hopefully, we'll see you tomorrow for that live stream hype video. And yeah, guys, just good luck. Remember that the sun is still going to be up. The world's still going to be turning at 12:30. When you guys get out of the test on Saturday, you're still going to be the same kid. It doesn't need to be the end of the world, right? Go have some fun with your friends. Go enjoy a good lunch or whatever. Go take a nap. But the world is still going to be turning. You wake up on a Saturday at 8 a.m., you take a test till 12:30, the world's still going, okay? Sun's still going to be up. Keep that positive mentality. Keep pushing forward. You guys will get it done, okay? Have a great rest of your night. I hope you guys have a great test on Saturday. We hope you see you for the video tomorrow. And, yeah, guys, good luck.